Hi, good afternoon. Michael Winn, Chief Digital Officer of Digital Ops, a division of RB Oppenheim Associates. Today I'm joined with Katie Lilly from Lilyfield Accounting Solutions.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about the book Traction, Getting a Grip on Your Business. And we're going to discuss and really dive into Chapter 5, which is the data component. So the data component, Katie, I think is really interesting because it's really about the numbers, the dollars, it's very quantitative.
Cerebral.
Cerebral. Very good. Yes, it is. So Gino Wickman really points out and talks about, everyone should have a number, and coming from a standpoint that if you have meaningful numbers, then they're actually manageable measurables. And I think that's really kind of the core of what this whole chapter is about. And then he launches into the scorecard. And so we'll talk about that, the scorecard and what that looks like. So he says, your scorecard basically should be roughly 5 to 15 different measurables. And he points out very quickly that it's not necessarily a profit and loss statement like a P&L.
Right.
Because the P&L is like, it's trailing information.
Right. You're not getting that till after like a month. Right.
Whereas with the scorecard, he really wants you to break it up into like 12-week, 13-week, like a 90-day, week by week type of measurable grid, and then with roughly 5 to 15 sort of categories. And so let's talk about those categories. Those categories might be, for instance, your accounts receivable. It could be your accounts payable. It could be
billable hours.
Billable hours. If you're in a service-based industry, it could be number of sales. It could be number of leads. It could be number of proposals. It could be
customer complaints.
Right. So there's a whole list of, sort of these really top-level things that you want to be able to quickly at a glance, see a proactive grade and value for those specific categories. What were your thoughts when you kind of read through and went through the scorecard?
Well, one of the things that was super interesting, that actually I just had an aha right now. I worked for a company that did this. So back in my youthful days, I worked for an orthopedic practice. And we had a weekly management meeting, and we always went over stats. That was the first thing we ever did, was we all had to present our stats.
Yeah.
And we all had measurables, and we had to put those stats in graphs, and our CEO would look. And if the graph wasn't going like this, trending upwards, then we immediately had to investigate why. And it was weekly. So we were always on top of problems as they arise, which goes back to what you were saying. If you're just relying on your profit and loss statement at the end of the month and you don't get that till maybe a week because bookkeeping has to close the books, you're looking at information that's after the fact, and you're already halfway into your next month and before you're ever correcting any trends that you find alarming. So you want to really start looking at this stuff on a weekly basis so that you can get that trend analysis. Now, the other thing is you don't want to be fearful of that trend analysis, because it could be that you're trending downward. What you want to know, though, is, yes, I'm trending. Like, for instance, I've got a couple service-based clients that are, they're like athletic trainers. So they naturally trend down in the summer. They don't have the, kids are, it's like people where they're training their kids, or like dance studios or things like that, where they just don't have the volume in the summer. Another restaurant, they just don't do the business that they do during the year, during the summer. And that's fine if it's trending downward. But if you know that, then you can plan for that, right? And and now you know what the natural rhythm is of your business, whereas you're not necessarily going to know that if you're not keeping some kind of scorecard on it.
A couple of other things that are in the scorecard that I think are really interesting that we didn't touch on, but I think is really key, is weekly revenue, cash balance, cash flow.
Right.
That's such a huge thing that
Yes.
you work with, right?
Right.
And payroll dollars. Those are some big honking operational numbers.
Right.
That I feel like some businesses, it's interesting. He talks about, this is sharing this scorecard with your leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe you're talking about just C-level only, right? So CFO, CEO, COO, however you decide. But then I also think that there's a scorecard that maybe is more at a managerial level,
Okay.
right? Because maybe those managers don't really need to know like some of these
like they don't
valuables.
need to know the top. Yeah. So if I'm using that in my business, I would say the C levels would want to know number of new clients, number of leads, dollar revenue, billable hours. But then my managerial level, it would be more of closing the books and how quickly did we close by the 15th? How many clients were closed by the 15th? More process related goals.
Right. I don't want my phone to blow up. And
I was scared it was my phone. I'm glad it's your phone.
I don't know who it was. So I just think that's interesting because he talks about in the book Mayor Giuliani from New York.
Right, with the crime.
Right. And so obviously, they were looking at crime statistics going down. And so their whole, scorecard was, arrests and, reports and like all the different variables. And so the ultimate goal of the scorecard was to, reduce the amount of crime in New York, right?
And change behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, when you develop the scorecard is to think about, what's the outcome that you want. So anyway, I think that was very interesting. So the book goes through, step one, set up your scorecard. Step two, figure out who's accountable. Step three, set your weekly goals. And it is the scorecard. We were talking about this before we jumped on. Is if you go back to the Vision Traction Organizer, the VTO, you're going to see that the scorecard, because it's in these 90-day blocks, is going to mirror definitely pieces of your 1-year plan,
right? And
then also could reflect some of your rocks and could be part of some of your issues,
right? And
that you're trying to track these to work your way back into solving the issues and solving the rocks.
Right. And that's what I was going to say was if you take that 1-year plan, you can almost reverse engineer into what your weekly goals need to be on your scorecard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so many times, businesses, it doesn't really matter what you are. I feel like, I worked in the automotive industry for, over a decade, about 12 years. And we would have sales meetings, and I worked at multiple dealerships and they all had different ways that they did it. Some of them had meetings every single morning. And then others had meetings like on Mondays and on Saturdays, and so it was just a different thing. But, absolutely it was like, how many leads do you have? And how many deals do you have? Like, it was so very, very quantitative. But, I think that when you put it together in a scorecard and it's got a little more comprehensive overview, it has a little more contextual sense other than how many sales, how many's closed. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's too finite on the number. I like the idea of the scorecard because it does kind of put it in a context of the whole, like, this is I'm going to hit to the punchline.
Right.
The scorecard is the data that gives you traction.
Ooh,
like that's it. Like that's the whole thing right here.
I love it.
Right? Because when you're starting to measure the data and it starts, like you were saying, if the chart goes up, if the arrow goes up, the data is what gives your business traction.
Right. And I think I had told you when I came in here that this was my favorite chapter, and you asked me why, and I said it was because of one line in the chapter, which is what gets watched improves. So what you're actually tracking, you're going to be motivated to improve.
I think the other thing, I love that too. And there were a couple of other things that he talked about that that really stuck out to me. And that was the scorecard allows you to anticipate problems before they happen.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
I think that so many times, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in,
you're putting out the fires.
You're reacting.
Yes.
You're reacting.
Yes.
Instead of proactively approaching and going, oh, you know what? I see that this is happening. I see this has happened a couple of times. No one's really brought it to anyone's attention. We've caught it before,
right?
It really caused an issue. And it's something that you can do. I think the other thing that was really a big light bulb for me is when you implement something like this, like a scorecard, he says it causes an organizational shift towards proactive problem solving.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
And I really like that. I think that's one of the core, I was telling you earlier about how I was thinking about core values again, and more core values in the people who are part of our company, mm-hmm. right? Digital Ops, RB Oppenheim Associates, and creative problem solvers, top of the list.
Right.
Like that is absolutely, you have to have that core value as who you are, right?
Right.
Because we move so fast and we have to be able to adapt and move. You've got to be able to problem solve.
Right.
But so I think that's really good. And I think the other thing that this points out current problems and predicts future ones.
Right.
Anything that can predict where we're going, I love.
Okay, so
instead of reacting to where we've been.
Okay, I'm going to share a vulnerable moment.
Okay.
All right. So one of the things that I absolutely hate doing, and I know some of my clients hate it as well, is invoicing at the end of the month.
Oh,
all right. Yeah. So right now, I run a report of all the time that my team did at the end of the month.
Right.
And then from that, I create invoices, and then I realize at that point how much money we made for the previous month. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm scared to death to do it because I have no idea what we made last month. I mean, I have kind of an idea, but I'm not sure. And I am hoping, God, I hope I can make payroll. And then, and so because of that fear, right? I have that fear.
Yep.
That now I'm just going to put it off, and maybe I don't get it out till the 5th instead of the 1st because I don't want to know, right? So what I love about this and what I'm going to implement effective today is
right now.
I'm going to start looking at, because we use a time tracking program,
right?
That we all put in real time on our phones and on our apps, and my team is expected to submit their time every Friday.
Yep.
So every Monday morning, I should be able to look at total billable hours and know exactly how many billable hours were for the last month. I should be able to multiply that by our billable rate and look at admin time. Mm-hmm. Admin time is a percent of billable time, and know exactly every week how much revenue should be coming in the door, so that it's not a surprise at the end of the month where I have to just be like, God, sure hope everything works out,
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that's why I love this chapter, because now I know.
Right.
I know if we're way crazy high on admin this week, I can say, hey, we got to bring it down this week. You know, let's put this task off a week. We got to get the billables back up,
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I know in my industry, I was just at a club meeting for my service industry. We all were talking about that very subject matter about putting in your time and all of it. We were talking about different kinds of apps and programs and what works and what doesn't. So it's a real thing. I think what you talked about is a real struggle that a lot of service-based businesses struggle with. And I think that's why this chapter is so important. Mm-hmm. In the second part, after he kind of goes through the scorecard, he talks about this idea that everyone should have a number. And I love the Charles Schwab story of the steel company.
Yes, that was great.
And it sets up this story where, for those of you who haven't read the book, basically Charles Schwab is running this steel company, and he walks into the mine and he asks the guy, how many coals did you guys put together during your shift today? And they said 6. So with a big piece of chalk, he writes this big 6 on the floor as you're walking into the mine. So the next day, the new shift comes in, right? And they see this giant 6 on the floor. And the foreman asked him, what does the 6 mean? And he says, well, Mr. Schwab came in and asked how many, things did they do in their shift? And the number was 6. So the night shift comes in later on that day and wiped off the floor is the 6 is gone and a big 7 is on there, right?
Yep.
And so then, they do their thing. And then the next group comes back in, they do their thing, and they write a 10.
Right.
And I thought, this is so great. So what he's trying to set up here is some people in your organization, when you introduce this scorecard concept and measurables and accountability, they're going to take it as a competitive, thing. Like,
or even
let's outshine
fun,
the other people, right?
Or like, ooh, fun, it's a game now.
But here's the other thing, and this is what I wrote down, and I think this is so true. Many times, I think businesses are going to want to implement this, and they're going to have people who are highly resistant to this.
Right.
And what he points out in this book is people who are highly resistant are the wrong people in the wrong seat.
Right.
Because they're going to be exposed.
Right. They're going to get busted.
They're bullshit. Yeah.
They're busted.
Like they're just
so busted.
So busted. So this is where the rubber meets the road again. When we really talk about, when you have the right people in the right seat or the right role, they're going to love this because it provides them clarity. They know what's expected. They know what they're trying to hit. It's not this, ominous, like, are we really achieving something?
Right, right.
It's really interesting. So he goes through, everyone has a number, and he talks about some of the different things that, numbers cut through, murky communication and expectations. It creates accountability. Accountable people appreciate numbers. It provides, clarity and commitment, competition, which is great. But ultimately, it's going to produce results. Right. Right.
It's going to get you to your goals.
Yeah. And if, again, all of these pieces of the VTO and the core values and the core focus and
the
all
right
of,
people
and the right people in the right roles, the scorecard measured, like you can really start to feel a rhythm of this, which then I feel like culture comes out of this.
Of course,
a company culture of this is how we do business.
This is what we do.
It's the engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the operating system, which is what he calls it.
Right.
It's so great. And then the other thing that we've talked about is you problem solve faster.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're
proactive.
You've broken it up. You can see trends. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on just, kind of where we walk through there on everyone has a number.
No, I love it. I mean, this is the next step, I think, for us. We're almost on track with the chapters as to where my leadership team is. And I think this is going to be at least developing the scorecard is going to be my next thing, at least for sure on the billable hours. Cause I'm just like, I don't want to have anxiety at the end of every month. Like that's not fun, and I want to be excited about getting my invoices out because I know we've got a great team and we do great work. And I want to be able to, collect what's due to us for our great work and not be afraid of that mysterious number of what it is at the end of the month, absolutely. So I'm excited for it.
Okay. Yeah. So again, guys, what we've talked about today is chapter 5 from the Traction book by Gino Wickman, the data component, which really breaks down creating a scorecard that allows you to monitor on a weekly basis these core categories, 5 to 15 areas. It could be operational areas. It could be sales related areas. It could be customer service related. It could be finance related, these categories, and then having these, the numbers, the markers of, what those are and being able to look at that and then rotate that, so you get a new card and you carry over the week before. So great chapter. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Next week, we will talk about chapter 6.
Actually, it'll be 2 weeks. 2
weeks. Oh, because we're going to be off next Friday.
I'm off. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll catch up with you in 2 weeks from today. And we're going to talk about the issues component. We're going to dig into the issues. That's right. Getting real. Guys, thank you so much. My name is Michael Winn. Lilly. Always a pleasure. Hope you guys have a great weekend. And I'll see you guys Monday on the Virtual Lunch and Learn. Have a great day. Bye-bye.